Hello, just want to welcome everyone as you file in. You are in the right place. Just going to allow a little more time for everyone to get settled, but we'll get going in about a minute from now. Thank you. Again, I want to let folks know you're in the right place. I'm going to allow about another 30 seconds before we get the presentation going today. Okay, an official hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Safety and Health Magazine webcast, Preventing Bullying and Violence in the Workplace, 5 Strategies to Reduce Risk, sponsored by J.J. Keller. My name is Kevin Drewley. I'm an associate editor with Safety and Health Magazine, and will be moderating today's session. Thanks for joining us. In a few minutes, we'll start our presentation, but first, let's review some preliminary items. The views of today's speakers and organizations are their own and may not necessarily reflect those of the National Safety Council or Safety and Health Magazine. Any mention of a commercial enterprise, product, or publication does not necessarily mean the council or magazine endorses those items. At the end of today's webcast, we'll conduct a question and answer session. To ask a question, simply click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, type your question, and click the send button. Feel free to ask your question at any time during the presentation. You don't have to wait for the question and answer session to begin. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible, but because of the large number of participants today, we might not get to every question. Any unanswered questions will be forwarded along to today's speakers. At the end of the webcast, you'll be asked to complete a brief evaluation survey, and we'll let you know more about that after the presentation. Be aware that additional resources from J.J. Keller can be found in the chat at the bottom of your screen as well. This webcast will be archived so you can access it after today's live event. To view this webcast and all of our past webcasts, please visit safetyandhealthmagazine.com/events. With that, let's go ahead and get started. Our speakers today are Michelle Higgins and Carmen King, who both serve as associate editors at J.J. Keller. Michelle researches and creates content on a variety of human resource topics, such as recruiting and hiring, independent contractors, layoffs, and workplace violence. She is a national member of the Society for Human Resource Management. Before joining J.J. Keller in 2022, Carmen contributed her editing expertise to the engineering and nonprofit sectors, where she refined standards, guidelines, and manuals to ensure compliance. Topics in her portfolio include health and safety, OSHA, and human resources. Again, we thank you all for tuning into this presentation. Michelle, whenever you're ready, go ahead and take it away.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. We're really glad that you could spend some time with us today. And today's webcast is sponsored by J.J. Keller Training, which makes building and maintaining an effective training program easy, intuitive, and less time-consuming. So you can enjoy 24/7 access to an industry-leading library of training content available in flexible e-learning, video, and classroom training formats to best meet the needs of your employees. So on behalf of our sponsor, I really want to thank you for being with us today. We're glad you are here to discuss this very important topic of workplace bullying and violence. As you know, disagreements sometimes happen at work, but when emotions escalate, things can get out of control really quickly. And even when there's no physical harm, bullying can leave deep emotional scars. And the effects can range from low morale to injuries or even death. Incidents of violence quickly become headline news. It's an ongoing concern for both employers and employees. So, this webcast today is going to cover 5 strategies to help you reduce that risk. It's going to include, we're going to talk about recognizing a hostile work environment. We're going to talk about handling a bully at work, investigating workplace misconduct, identifying warning signs of workplace violence, and then lastly, we're going to talk about terminating an employee safely. To set up the framework of our discussion today, let's look at how workplace violence is defined. And here on this slide are some key points from similar but just slightly different definitions from two government agencies. We've got OSHA on one side of the screen and NIOSH on the other. And you can see some of the terms that each of these agencies use are similar, Um, OSHA talks about how workplace violence is any act or threat of physical violence, harassment, intimidation, or other threatening, disruptive behavior that occurs at the work site. And it can range from threats and verbal abuse to physical assaults and even homicide. It can affect and involve employees, clients, customers, and visitors. NIOSH, so the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, that agency calls it occupational violence, and it defines it as the act or threat of violence ranging from verbal abuse to physical assaults directed towards persons at work or on duty. And this definition, I think, is really interesting because it calls out the psychological issues. So there's something deeper than even the physical injuries or death. There's a lot that could, when it comes to workplace violence, there's a psychological component in there. Um, so that is just sort of the framework of our conversation for today. And I'm going to turn it over to Carmen, and she's going to talk about the general duty clause under OSHA.
Thanks, Michelle, and welcome everyone. Although OSHA doesn't have a specific workplace violence standard, workers have a right to a safe workplace. Employers must provide a workplace free of known health and safety hazards, and employees have the right to speak up about concerns without fear of retaliation. This is addressed in OSHA's General Duty Clause, which you see here on this slide. Employers may violate the General Duty Clause if they fail to reduce or eliminate serious recognized hazards. During an investigation, OSHA inspectors would likely gather evidence to demonstrate whether an employer recognized, either individually or through its industry, the existence of a potential workplace violence hazard affecting employees. Investigations likely will focus on whether feasible means of preventing or minimizing such hazards were available to employers. Investigators would also look at potential whistleblower retaliation in cases where workers have complained of workplace violence risks or have reported injuries resulting from actual workplace violence.
Thanks, Carmen. Right. So let's go on to, okay, we got the general duty clause. Let's go on and talk about a few items that some of you in the audience today might have heard a little bit about. OSHA is currently working on a standard for preventing workplace violence in healthcare and social assistance settings. Those are some really key industries with the potential for violent incidents. If you're in these industries, this is something to definitely keep an eye on. So in the fall regulatory agenda, which came out in December of 24, this was in the proposed rule stage. What the regulatory agenda means is, so twice a year, the government comes out with almost like a to-do list, things that they're working on, trying to get through and proceed with different actions. So in the fall, it was in the proposed rules stage. We are anticipating, we're kind of watching this one. We're anticipating OSHA to publish a proposed rule in the Federal Register in this month, June 2025. I have not heard anything recently, but we're keeping an eye on that. So that we'll keep you posted on that. And you might wonder, again, why a focus on these areas? Well, OSHA explains that work violence is a widespread problem for employees in healthcare and social services. These two industries alone, data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics estimates that annually in the US, there's about 15,000 days away cases prompted by an intentional injury made by another person. So again, keep you posted on how this one progresses. And we've talked about this before. If you've been to our webcast, you might remember this, but I just want to remind everybody out there. So at a state level, we're starting to see states come out with a little bit more action when it comes to laws involving violence. Right now, it's a lot in the healthcare field, but California, if you recall, last summer, so last July of 2024, July 1st, California was the first state to come out with a workplace violence prevention law for general industry. So it's across the board. It goes beyond just healthcare. It's most employers in California. And so California employers had to include the workplace violence prevention plan as part of their effective injury prevention program. So they needed to have things in place by last July. And I'm still getting questions from customers about how to comply or some details on what they need to do. So it's, even though it went into effect last summer, I think employers are still trying to sort of figure out some of the details. Couple things that employers need to do. They need to keep a violent incident log. They need to provide effective training, and that's effective training, quote unquote. That's kind of how it's worded. It is not spelled out in terms of kind of what that means. And this one is really tricky because it needs to be tailored to the work environment. So if an employer has different work sites, it's got to be tailored to that work site, which is tough. And the employer has to also provide additional training when there's a new or a previously unrecognized workplace violence hazard when it's identified. So there's a lot of moving parts in this one. Just recently, as I was preparing for today's presentation, so mid-May, it was May 13th, Cal OSHA released a revised draft. So they're working on it, but then they released a revised draft. They're working on the wording. They're seeking additional input on the discussion draft. They want more input on it. And I just want to mention to this group today, if you're in California or you have California locations, people that are interested in commenting on it, they're invited to submit their written comments to Deputy Chief of Health Eric Berg, eberg at dir.ca.gov by July 14th, 2025. So if you have questions, let me know. I can give that to you again later. So they're kind of working on that language of it. And then an advisory committee meetings will be scheduled later. So if you're in California, even though this law went into effect last summer, there's still some movement going on with it. So keep your eyes on that. And then another date that I just want to call out briefly for anyone in New York, and particularly in the New York retail industry, way on the other side of the country. The Retail Workers Safety Act was signed into law last September 4th of 24. It took effect just recently, June 2nd, 2025, and that was bumped back from March. This applies to New York retail employers with 10 or more employees. So it's a specific segment of workers. It's kind of similar to California. You need to have the policy and training upon hire and annually after. Employers with fewer than 50 employees can conduct training every 2 years following the time of hire. That was tweaked this spring. They changed that a little bit. And then the other I think is interesting, the other interesting component with this law is that starting January 1st, 2027, employers with 500 or more retail employees statewide, not nationwide. Initially, they said nationwide, but they changed that to statewide. They have to install a silent response button, so like a panic alarm, something like that. And there's details with that, but these are just kind of the key components with that. So I think these two different states, California, New York, the details of these laws are really interesting. And I think, my opinion, for other employers who are looking to increase their training and increase their workplace violence prevention knowledge for their own workers, could really use these two states as sort of guideposts for what to do and what are some good tips. So if you have questions on these, just let us know. And I'm going to turn it back over to Carmen.
Thanks, Michelle.
Yep.
Hold on, my computer's moving a little slow.
Oh, no problem.
I've got it. Part of the reason these agencies and employers are taking workplace violence so seriously can be seen by the numbers on this slide. There were 5,283 fatal work injuries recorded in the U.S. in 2023, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the National Census of Fatal Occupational Injuries report. This is a 3.7% decrease from last year, but still way too many fatal injuries. Other key findings from 2023 were a worker died every 99 minutes from a work-related injury, 740 fatalities due to violent acts in 2023. Homicides accounted for 61.9% of these fatalities, and workers ages 25 to 34 had the highest number of fatalities due to violent acts at 179, including 121 homicides. So, how do employers help reduce the risk of these kinds of events happening at work? In most workplaces where risk factors can be identified, violent acts can be prevented or minimized. In fact, sometimes bullying or an act of violence begins before the actual incident itself. Certain hostile behaviors that are allowed at work not only contribute to a hostile work environment, but they can stoke the flames of violence. A hostile work environment generally consists of a pattern of offensive comments or behaviors so frequent or persistent that it affects a person's ability to perform the job. It often results in people feeling excluded by others while at work. It commonly involves an employee who experiences this type of rude, unwelcome conduct from coworkers. It could be someone's peer in the same department or a coworker in another location. It could be a team leader, manager, supervisor, or even an executive. Sometimes even customers or vendors can be the culprits. Michelle?
Thanks, Carmen. All right. Trying to advance the slide and it's there we go. All right, let's talk about illegal harassment. A major contributing factor to a hostile work environment is harassment. Harassment can take on a lot of different forms because, um, like bullying, for example. Every company has a duty to stop all forms of harassment because unacceptable conduct in the workplace should not be allowed. But some people's actions are what you might just call bad manners. So even if their behavior maybe doesn't rise to the level of violating the law, their actions shouldn't be acceptable. Harassment is also a form of employment discrimination when unwelcome behavior is directed at a person in a protected class, whether an applicant or an employee. Such harassment crosses the line and becomes unlawful when, number one, the enduring offensive conduct becomes a condition of continued employment, or number two, the conduct is severe or pervasive enough to create a work environment that a reasonable person would consider intimidating, hostile, or abusive. Generally, employers should watch for patterns of behavior, but in some circumstances, a single incident of harassment, such as physical violence or a threat of physical violence, could result in a hostile work environment. Back to you, Carmen.
Oh, thanks. Good. My slides are moving slow.
Yep, mine are too, a little bit.
Speaking of a hostile work environment, let's talk about workplace bullies for a moment. Handling a bully can be tough. When it comes to poor work behaviors, where do you draw the line? You don't have to discipline everyone who tells a joke or censor every comment that isn't work related. There's a difference between offensive behavior and fun workplace banter. Many employees exchange friendly jokes, and this usually isn't a problem. How a joke is intended or how it's received, though, could become serious or even hostile. Addressing an employee's offensive conduct might not be a one time event because behaviors don't change that easily. The employee may need regular reminders to encourage the desired behavior and to point out when the person is falling into old habits. Offensive behavior that's not dealt with can lead to lost productivity, increased absences, and employees quitting. And unfortunately, it probably won't be the bully leaving. You could lose a valuable employee. That's why creating a culture of respect can help in your retention efforts. While you can't change human nature or eliminate all conflict from the workplace, you can take steps to foster a positive environment. Now, the opposite of a positive, respectful work environment is a toxic one in which bullying could play a role. Workplace bullying is repeated, unwelcome behavior that humiliates or intimidates a coworker or sabotages the person's performance. The key word is repeated. A single incident or of anger or frustration might not be bullying, but if a pattern develops, it could be. Remember, even though many employees are working remotely, Bullying can still occur through email, instant messages, texts, and phone calls. Michelle?
Thanks, Carmen. Bullying takes many forms, such as the ones listed here on the slide. So you could have expressions of hostility, and that can be verbally or even through body language. Abusive conduct, and that would be behavior that belittles, harasses, or isolates a coworker. Abuse of power, so that would be berating one employee for an infraction while allowing others a free pass. Or deceit and sabotage, so taking credit for somebody else's work. As you and your company conduct employee training in 2025, I really want you to consider adding two elements to your training schedule under the umbrella of workplace violence training. And one is on bystander training. So it's important, I think, to teach employees what to do if they witness bullying behaviors. Because really, in those kinds of moments, employees have basically three choices in that moment. They can either condone or join in, which is not a good idea, do nothing and walk away, or they can intervene safely. And I like to add safely. Be careful. You don't want anyone getting hurt. Um, and some ideas for intervening safely are in the little blue box. The person could create a distraction, maybe drop some pens and paper, or pretend to be looking for something, reach for something in a cupboard, something to distract what's happening between the bully and the victim, kind of get in that in between without overtly getting in between, so to speak. You could redirect. You could have the person, the bystander, say something to redirect the conversation and shift that focus. Another option, they can go get help. There's strength in numbers. Bystanders can intervene as a group, maybe go get a boss or supervisor. Um, Fourth one, they could remove the target, walk with that person who's being targeted as from the bully and help diffuse that potential bullying interaction. And it doesn't have to be a direct. You could have them, teach them to say something like, "Hey, can you come over here? I need some help with something." Or, "Hey, the boss is looking for you right now." It doesn't have to be true, but get them remove that target, figure out a way to get them away from that bully. And then lastly, follow up. So this is a little bit more after the situation, reach out, encourage employees to reach out and check with that person who is being bullied. Let them know that you don't agree with it and that you care, and that can really make the difference. So those are just a few tips on how to teach your employees to be good bystanders. Another option is number 6, and I didn't put this on the slide because it's a little more risky, because it would be more of a direct approach, telling the bully to stop. So having that bystander just really be direct and say you need to stop. But to me, that's a little bit risky. In my opinion, there's potential for that escalation, and that's something that you definitely want to avoid if at all possible. But I hope this helps. I get a lot of questions on bystander training, so I hope this gets you thinking for training in this new year. The other training I want to offer to you to consider adding to your training schedule for this year is something called civility training. And what that is all about is 66% of respondents to a March 2024 survey conducted by SHRM, Society for Human Resources Management, which is a national HR organization. Um, so 66% either experienced or witnessed workplace incivility in the prior month. And the most common forms of uncivil behaviors were when employees addressed others in a disrespectful way, they interrupted others who were speaking, and they micromanaged people to an excessive degree. So, really, the goal of civility training is to create a more respectful work environment with less conflict. While civility training isn't only focused on preventing harassment, that could be a component. Um, Research has shown that incivility could be a precursor to harassment. But in contrast to anti-harassment training, civility training tends to give employees positive examples of how to behave versus actions to avoid. So it's a little bit more of a different approach with training. This is what you should do. The training typically includes a focus on interpersonal communications, conflict resolution, and effective supervisory techniques. How civility training is presented really depends on the size of your workforce, the demographics, the location, the industry. So there's really not a one size fits all approach. But the point is to get employees to be more aware of how their words and their actions impact others and how they should treat everybody with respect. So I like this approach because it's more of this is how you should do things. It's more of a positive spin on training, which I really like. So something to consider for your training efforts for this year.
Thanks, Michelle. Even with bystander and civility training, workplace bullying can still happen. So you need to know how to respond. Ignoring a bullying problem won't work. It needs to be addressed promptly. Having a clear anti-bullying policy is a good place to start. Encourage victims and witnesses to speak up and report issues. Remind employees they won't be retaliated against for filing these reports, and they shouldn't fear for their jobs for doing so. Company leaders should take action once they're aware of a bullying situation and treat all reports seriously. Assume everything being said is true. It might be exaggerated, but keep an open mind. The effects on the victim are real and need to be addressed. Maintain confidentiality as much as possible, but don't promise 100% confidentiality because that could inhibit your ability to investigate thoroughly. Empower employees and supervisors in your company to identify and respond appropriately to incidents of bullying and violence in the workplace with JJ Keller training. Available in online e learning and video formats, this training course provides learners with the knowledge and tools to maintain a safe, respectful work environment. Because JJ Keller Training is today's event sponsor, we're offering all attendees access to free workplace bullying and violence training from JJ Keller Training.
All right.
So use the poll to select your areas of interest. And as a thank you, you'll also receive our popular white paper on workplace bullying and violence. And while you're answering your question, let's answer a few that have come in from our attendees.
Okay. Do we have any questions that have come in yet?
It's not appearing so. I know that I want to remind everyone if you want to ask a question, you can click that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and type it, but not any questions so far.
Okay. And that is okay. So yeah, if there's something that anybody wants us to address at the end, just use that Q&A box and you can send Carmen and I questions and we'll get to as many as we can with the time that we have left. So we will keep, um, oh, I see somebody, does NIOSH have any enforcement power? That's a really good question. I don't know if I can answer that off the top of my head. Not sure on that one, actually. I, th- it's a good question. If you want, send me I can look into that, and if you can reach out to me after the webcast, and I can dig into it. A lot of times, agencies will come out with some of these things that are more guidance. I would say the only enforcement, really, from an OSHA perspective, now I know NIOSH is a little bit different, but would be that general duty clause, and that's kind of where that they really that's the governing law really from a federal perspective. So I don't think NIOSH necessarily has any enforcement per se. Yeah, it's a good question. That's a tricky one. And I have not gotten that one before. So thank you. Okay, I will keep moving along and let us know. All right, let's see here. Click to the next slide. Let's talk about investigating workplace misconduct. And this is a question I get, or topic I get a lot of questions on too. It's usually, so when it comes to workplace investigations, it's usually done by somebody in human resources or somebody else in authority at the company, maybe a manager or supervisor or something like that. And there really are 5 steps in the investigative process, and I want to also add the reminder to document. As an HR person, we're always saying document, document, document. It's a favorite word in the HR world. So, number one, of course, you want to interview the victims and the witnesses. So, anybody involved in the incident of whatever happened, you want to interview them, hear what they have to say, and take in that information. Meet with each person separately and privately. Their versions of what happened may differ. They probably will differ. You want to interview the offender, tell them about the allegations, and then give that person the opportunity to reply to the complaint and keep an open mind. Um, and like Carmen said, too, you want to maintain confidentiality as much as possible, but don't promise 100% confidentiality because that could inhibit your ability to investigate thoroughly. And I don't think it's something that you can promise. So you want to be careful with that. And remember to document everything during the investigation. So this is just sort of that skeleton framework of how to walk through an investigation process. When investigating workplace misconduct like bullying, review everybody's statements. And if you need clarification, go ahead and conduct a second round of interviews and evaluate the credibility of the statements. If there are no witnesses, that can be really difficult. You're going to have to evaluate one person's word against another. And even if you don't think bullying occurred, your employees obviously have problems working together, and that conflict needs to be resolved. And that's when going back to the training that I mentioned, that civility training, can kind of maybe help in this type of situation. At the end of the investigation, you want to create, submit, and keep an objective report. Couple of tips again, describing those allegations, what was reported, explain what your investigation process was, um, outline all the evidence, including who was interviewed, and then conclude whether or not workplace bullying occurred.
Okay, and if the investigation found that bullying occurred, communicate recommendations to the victim, bully, and others involved. Your options to resolve matters will vary, but the response should be appropriate to the level of seriousness. For example, you could direct the bully to stop the behavior, invite an apology, conduct individual training, provide mediation, coach, counsel, or mentor the bully, or use disciplinary action. Remember to follow up and make sure the bullying has stopped. Keep in mind, threats to harm someone, acts of violence, assault, property damage, and stalking are criminal matters. Employees engaging in these kinds of behaviors would likely be immediately terminated at a minimum, and you might even need to contact the police. Sometimes bullying can escalate into workplace violence. In fact, some jobs are more prone to violence. Research has identified factors that may increase the risks for some workers, such as exchanging money with the public, working with volatile or unstable people, working alone or in isolated areas, providing services and care, or working where alcohol is served. Time of day and work location, such as working late at night or in areas with high crime rates, are also risk factors that should be considered.
Everybody wants to know how to identify warning signs to help reduce the risk of injuries or death. And generally, there are several contributing factors or signs to watch for. And these can be personal or work issues. So, from a personal perspective, some warning signs could be if somebody is experiencing financial, legal, or marital and family problems, drug or alcohol abuse, mental or physical ailments, or sometimes just general hatred. Um, so those would be maybe the personal issues. And then from a work perspective, if somebody has experienced job loss or some other negative employment issue, maybe they got demoted or written up or disciplined, something like that. If they have real or perceived unfair treatment, so they feel like they're not being treated fairly at work, whether that's really happening or not, doesn't matter. It's how they're perceiving it, and then also harassment by coworkers or other conflicts. So Watch for employees who complain about these kinds of things, especially if they blame others for their problems or they seem to be contemplating suicide. So, kind of keep your ears open for employees that are going through any of these kinds of things. Doesn't mean they're going to do something necessarily, but these are some warning signs. Although many threats don't escalate into violence, when they do, the person often exhibited warning signs. So these are some more tips of things to kind of keep your eyes and ears open for. So if you've got an employee who's maybe typically a good employee, but suddenly is kind of becoming a problem, they're getting frustrated, they lash out, they fight with their coworkers, they have some kind of an obsession with weapons or violence, that type of thing. They're making direct or implied threats. They're starting to say kind of things that are a little bit off. Um, if they've had a recent decline in health or hygiene, suddenly they're just not like themselves. And again, or if they're exhibiting signs of drug or alcohol abuse. So it could be any one of these. It could be a combination of things. Again, these are just some things to kind of keep your eyes and ears open for in your own workplaces.
It's also important to note that it isn't just employees carrying out acts of workplace violence. An offender could be from outside your organization, such as a customer, vendor, an employee's spouse or significant other, or an acquaintance of an employee. One of the best protections employers can offer their workers is to establish a zero tolerance policy about workplace violence. This policy should cover all workers, patients, clients, customers, visitors, contractors, and anyone else who may come in contact with company personnel. In most workplaces where risk factors can be identified, the risk of assault can be prevented or minimized if employers take appropriate precautions. When the perpetrator is an employee's spouse or domestic partner, they could bring conflicts from home to the workplace. Just as everyday life issues don't get left behind when employees report for work, domestic violence does not disappear either. Domestic violence presents a unique set of challenges for employers, supervisors, and company security staff.
Thanks, Carmen.
Mhm.
Okay, so I added this next slide to this presentation today, and this is a tough one. This is a real life example of what can happen when a domestic violence situation infiltrates work. Um, and I put a little QR code on there, so if you want, you can use your phone to get it, and then you can read the court case because it's really long and detailed. But I wanted to add it to our conversation today because I think this is a really good example of what can happen, and it's so sad. I won't go into all these details, but the gist of the situation is it was a case in Florida where an employee was attacked at work by a former employee and a dating partner. So these two people were dating. Um, the assailant, if you will, got terminated at some point. Um, and the person came back. Let's see. Let me look at my notes here. Okay. The employee, the victim in this case, worked in customer service payroll. The assailant was a former employee who got terminated. They dated for a few months. They broke up. They stayed amicable for a while and then were not amicable. Things kind of went down the tubes. After about a year, so this is how these things can progress. A year went by. The employee cut off contact, and then the assailant ended up renting a car, drove to the Orlando facility, and attacked her. And what happened was this person wore his old work sweatshirt, his old work gloves, sunglasses, and he blended in with employees. He tried to get into the facility through a locked warehouse door, and that didn't work out. So then he kind of waited outside until a different employee used a to key in, badge in, and then followed that employee inside. Once he got in the building, he found the person's desk. It doused, this is just awful, doused her in gasoline and set her on fire. And then he fled through an emergency exit. Now, I will say she lived, she was not killed, thankfully. Um, but it was just so sad and so tragic on many, many levels, not only for the victim, but everybody in the workplace, I'm sure, was completely traumatized by this happening. Now, the reason I am sharing this case with you is the the employee sued the company for negligence, which you can read more about in the court case. And the employer won, and I put won in quotes because the employer technically won in court. But I don't think anybody honestly won in this case. It's so sad. But a few key takeaways I want to share with you guys today was just things to keep in mind to protect and this is an extreme situation. I mean, not probably something that would happen any other day, but um, one thing I want to remind everybody of, building security is really, really important, and lapses don't automatically mean liability. What I mean by that is um, the details of the case, just because he was able to get in does not mean that they were necessarily liable. This is such an extreme situation that in this case, the court was like, the employer could not anticipate all these things happening. It doesn't make it great. So if there's something you can do to make your building more secure, do it. Um, and in this case, too, training employees not to just let people piggyback in. We have that kind of training at my company all the time. They're talking about that. And I think it's easy to kind of blow off like, oh, who would do that? Nobody's going to do that. But it happened in this case. Number two, anticipating the risk comes into play. And again, in this case, the employer won because the circumstances were so out there and outlandish that the court said, look, there's so many things to this situation that they simply couldn't anticipate. So they were not held liable. But again, I think if you want to do your due diligence, just sort of thinking like, how can we best keep our employees safe? What are some things we can try to anticipate? And I'm sure a lot of you out there do that already. And then thirdly, it's more than just about the legalities, right? I kind of mentioned the trauma. I mean, yes, the employer won, but I mean, it was probably a very traumatic event for everybody involved. Um, and obviously something that the company just wants to not even have happen. So those are just some things to keep in mind. You can read about it if you'd like. It's a pretty current case, or this particular step in it. I think it just happened a couple years ago. It just came across my desk a few weeks ago, and I was reading about it. I thought, ooh, this would be a good audience to share this with. Just to, again, as an example of some things that you could do to consider better safety at your company. If you have questions, let me know on this. But I just wanted to share that with you today. If you suspect one of your employees might be in an abusive relationship, and these are just, again, some signs you can maybe look for. Are they arriving to work late or very early? Are they having more unplanned absences? Are they displaying a decrease in productivity? They're stressed out from personal calls or texts. Maybe they're wearing long sleeves on a hot day or sunglasses to hide some injuries, struggling to make decisions or concentrate. They're stressed out. They have physical ailments, bruises, headaches, stomach aches, pains. And are they showing signs of fear, anxiety, depression, or fatigue? So these are all, again, just kind of keeping your eyes and ears open for things that could happen. I'm going to turn it back over to Carmen.
Thanks, Michelle. If you think an employee is a victim of domestic violence, avoid acting as a licensed counselor. It's okay to show concern and offer support, but don't try to solve the problem yourself. When approaching the employee, don't speculate on the nature of the problem. In other words, don't assume it is domestic violence related. You could simply indicate that you've noticed the person seems stressed and that resources are available, such as an employee assistance program. Some victims, if asked, Do you have a problem at home?" would simply deny it, and that could shut down further discussions or discourage the person from seeking help. Also, don't discuss the employee's personal information with anyone else without permission, unless, of course, there is imminent danger. While you may feel a natural urge to help a victim of domestic violence, avoid potentially dangerous situations. Be careful about becoming overly involved or doing personal favors. For instance, Don't offer your home as shelter or make impromptu safety checks at the employee's home. Maintain your relationship as supervisor, not as counselor. As a supervisor, you need to be aware of the laws that apply to domestic violence, such as OSHA laws require employers to maintain a safe workplace, which could include protecting employees from known violence. Family and medical leave laws may require employers to grant leave to employees who are injured as a result of domestic violence. And victim assistance laws may prohibit employers from taking adverse job actions against employees who disclose their situation or who take time off from their jobs to make court appearances. Michelle?
Throughout today's webcast, we've talked about reducing risks for violence. And while we don't dive too deeply into hiring, I just want to briefly call attention to the potential pitfalls of negligent hiring and not thoroughly vetting a job applicant before bringing them on board. So, one way to minimize or prevent the hazards and limit employer liability is to have a thorough hiring process in place that includes background checks. With so many companies sometimes struggling to recruit and retain workers, it's tempting to sometimes skip certain steps in the hiring process, but doing that could be kind of risky. If something happened, investigators might look to see what an employer missed or what should they have known about this new hire. And on the flip side of having a thorough hiring process is having a safe termination process. And this is a topic that a lot of my HR colleagues and I discuss quite a bit, is terminations. It's one of our more popular presentations we do. In the context of workplace violence, a lot of people ask, what's the best or the safest way to terminate an employee? And there's really no easy answer for this. Terminations are hard, but here are 5 useful tips to consider when terminating an employee. And keep in mind, none of these, of course, guarantee anybody's safety, but it's again more about mitigating that risk, protecting employees, protecting the company. So you can consider terminating remotely. I think that's become a little more common in the past few years with a lot of remote workers. That way, they aren't even on the premises. Number two, don't give employees a heads up. And what I mean about that is, of course, companies might have a disciplinary process going on where somebody's on a performance improvement plan or a PIP. So maybe somebody knows they're kind of like, oh, I might be getting terminated. What I mean with this is you don't want to dangle in front of them, like you better shape up or we're going to fight, you're going to get fired this Friday if you don't get your act together, that kind of thing. You don't want to like clue them in that they're going to get terminated ahead of time, because then you give them, if something's going to happen, then they have time to think about it and plan, and you don't want that to happen. So no advance notice on terminations. Don't let any employees return to their desk or remain on site. I think that one is pretty commonly known for the most part. If you think there's going to be an issue, inform your security or police or local sheriff's department or building security, something. If you're kind of like, this could go haywire, get other people involved to keep everyone around safe. And then lastly, walk the employee out of the building with security, get them out of the building, away, off the premises, whatever that looks like for you in your industry, your location. These all could be a little bit different depending where you are, but these are just some tips. Okay, so we covered a lot of ground today, and while this webcast can really get that conversation started at your organization, I just really want to encourage you to work with your local or your industry experts who are familiar with your business. This could be local law enforcement or other resources in your areas. But here are a few takeaways to help you prepare for and minimize incidents of workplace violence. So, number one, you want to be alert for the warning signs that we discussed today. We covered a lot of warning signs for people that may be experiencing some personal issues, some work issues, domestic violence warning signs. Again, it could be any combination of these things, but those are just tips and things to keep in mind. Always take threats seriously and handle issues promptly and report them to your HR department or police. That's really important. I think it's tempting to sometimes blow things off like, oh, they were just mad. They didn't really mean that. And don't want to get anybody in trouble, that sort of thing. But you've got to take those threats seriously. Know your company's crisis response procedures. And if you don't have a crisis response plan, create one. Um, like I said, if you aren't even sure where to start, you can kind of look to California and even New York, really, as some guidance. Or JJ Keller, we're happy to help too. But get a plan together, get something together that you have a way to respond if something happens. Train on responding to threats and violent acts. So train, practice, think about that civility training, those kinds of things. I think training is so important, and keep on training. And then lastly, watch for and report any security concerns. So unlocked doors, defective lighting, unidentified visitors, anything that's off. Have sort of maybe a process in place where somebody kind of keeps an eye on all these things around the facility to keep everybody safe. Workplace bullying and violence affect the victims as well as the company's bottom line, and make sure employees know that abuse and violence won't be tolerated and that there will be consequences. So you might not be able to prevent every incident, but through your actions, you can help maintain a safer and more productive work environment for everybody. So with that, I'm going to read a little information about JJ Keller and what kinds of training we have. Um, we hope you found it helpful today. And before we move on to questions, I just want to remind you guys and thank our webcast sponsor, JJ Keller Training. Whatever your company's needs, JJ Keller Training can help. We've got 24/7 access to hundreds of online courses and streaming videos across multiple industries. And so today we're offering our attendees a PDF of our popular workplace bullying and violence white paper, as well as access to free workplace bullying and violence training from our JJ Keller training line. So that may be a really good starting point too. If you just are not sure where to start with your own company training, this is a really great place to start with that. So I'm going to launch a poll, or somebody behind the scenes is, oh, the poll's on screen. Never mind. Thank you. All right. So we've got a poll. You could click on what you'd like. And then just as a reminder, we're going to get you that white paper as well. Am I forgetting anything? We're covering so much today. I think we've got about 10 minutes left for questions, which is perfect.
Yes, excellent. Great job, Michelle and Carmen. Thanks for sharing your insights and expertise. As you're indicating, you did cover a lot of ground. Just briefly backtracking, those resources that Michelle has mentioned, you can find those in the chat. You may have to scroll to the top, but that's where those will be. Before we do launch into the Q&A, just want to let everyone know also about the evaluation survey that we'll ask you to complete. That survey will open in a different screen following the webinar. As always, we appreciate your input as it helps us improve our future webcasts. There are some questions right now in the queue, but again, if you'd like to ask one, just click the Q&A button at
Oh,
the bottom of your screen. Oh, go
okay.
ahead, Michelle.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Okay.
Uh, I'm just looking at the questions that are coming in.
All right. Yes, no, without further ado, yeah, if you have a question, you click that Q&A button, type it, and click the send button, and now we'll get to those questions. First one asks, do you have a suggestion when it's hearsay and it's unable to confirm or deny that bullying has occurred? For example, maybe a third person witnessed an argument and both employees involved are denying that it happened.
Hmm. Well, and that's tricky, and I bet it happens more often than not. But if somebody, let's say somebody's came to you and said, "Gosh, so and so and so and so aren't getting along. I heard this. They're still witnessing it, and it is affecting that person, whether or not, even if they're not involved in the conflict, it's bothering them and it's affecting their work life. So I think what I would do in that case is talk to the two employees who are allegedly having a conflict and see what they have to say. And this is tricky because you don't want to necessarily say who brought forth the information, but um, just ask them about it, keep an eye on it, depending on the size of the company, maybe have their supervisors keep an eye on what's going on. And really, even if it's just, I don't want to say just, but even if there wasn't a violent incident happening, it's employee conduct. And that type of behavior should not be allowed at work. Hopefully, you have a good, thorough company policy, which we can also help you with. And you can point to the company policy and say, look, it is our policy that this is a safe, respectful workplace. Um, just to remind you of the policy. And if you do not follow the policy, this is what's going to happen. So sometimes that can help. Of course, document it for sure. And then keep an eye on it to make sure it stops and it doesn't keep happening, especially the person who brought it forward. You don't want them to get suddenly they're getting bullied for telling. Um, so good question. That's a really good question. What else do we have?
Next question isn't so much a question as a comment, just as an attendee saying, I'm a hugger, and now I realize that some may find that uncomfortable, and I'm so sorry to make anyone feel that way, and I won't be doing that anymore.
Aw, I, I think it's brave to admit going, oh, I think I've been doing this thing and I didn't realize that might bother some people. I think that's brave to recognize and admit and say, you know what, I'm going to do things differently. This just happened to me this past weekend. Somebody, it wasn't in a work setting, it was an outside setting, and this person said that to me. I'm a hugger, and came in before I even knew what was going on, and it was fine. But again, at work, that can be kind of awkward and not everybody likes that. And I think it's good to recognize that and just, um, be aware. And yeah.
Thank you. But before the next one, just want to thank attendees. I know there's been an exchange, and now you need not scroll up. You can get those resources right in the middle of the current chat. So thank you. And again, please do download those if you haven't already. Next question asks, if a person is sexually assaulted at work but does not report it to the police, how should the employer handle that? And it's saying there would be no witnesses and conflicting accounts.
That is really, really tough. Well, talk to the victim and go through that investigation process, document everything. You know, it, it's just, it'll depend on a lot of details. Um, no witnesses, conflicting accounts. Um, you know, all you can do is I think talk to them and try to get to the bottom of it as best you can. Um, and keep a record of it and point to, policies and things like that. It's if it really was an assault, I don't know if you, one of my colleagues is a little bit more versed in sexual harassment training. And it might depend on your state too, because I think there's 6 or 7 states that mandate sexual harassment training. So it kind of depends on what state you're in. Hopefully you have policies in place too. For the victim, you want to make sure that they have all the resources they need available, whether that's an employee assistance program, things like that. Um, this this is this could almost even involve a lawyer for your company to, depending on all of the details. So that's tough for sure. Um, that's a really good question. Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts, but walk through your investigation process, document, and go from there. Good luck with that if that is your workplace. It's not good. That's definitely not good.
Next question asks, what if the bully is a high-level executive?
I get that question quite a bit. Um, Almost every time I do this webcast, it that comes up, and that makes me so sad because that really speaks to a company's culture if that bully is coming from the top down. Um, and it doesn't mean that they're not held accountable. A lot of times at a company, there's a board of directors, there is an executive team. So depending what's happening, bring it to the board if you can, document what's going on. I think again, encourage the person who, depending who's complaining about it or who's experienced or what happened, have people document what happened, who, what, where, when, that kind of thing, date, time, place, what was said, and bring that to the board. And the tough part, and I've heard this more often than I wish, is sometimes HR is like, we know we don't know what to do. It's the CEO, it's the VP, and if it's a really bad problem, that the work environment is toxic and not going to change, and the board isn't going to do anything, and the CEO is not going to change, unfortunately, then, you might have to start looking for a different job if it's just an environment that's not going to change, which is really sad. Hopefully not, but um, do what you can.
Looks like we've got time for one more.
Yeah.
And it asks, how helpful does a survey about bullying and mental health in the workplace, how helpful can that be for prevention when the supervisors are involved?
Hmm. Well, I'm all for serving employees to find out how, what's going on and what to get first and to find out what's going on in the company. Might want to approach it from a broader perspective. Like there's something called like 360 reviews, and where you could do a sampling of employees and get their perspectives on other, a variety of things, and invite employees to anonymously respond and leave comments and things like that. If it's a supervisor, it should be definitely addressed. They might need, oh, another thing I want to mention too with the executives, they might need coaching. They might not realize they're doing it, which sounds kind of silly, but they might not realize what they're saying is offensive or whatever. So they might need training, coaching, meetings with HR or something, to put on a PIP, to improve. So I'm all for employee surveys. I think employee surveys are super helpful, from a variety of perspectives, and it's a good way to show that you care about what your employees are going through. So yeah, I think it's great. Done right and worded correctly. I would work with somebody who knows how to do those kinds of things.
Okay, well, thank you. Unfortunately, we have run out of time today. We're sorry that we didn't
Uh,
get to everyone's questions, but again, all of today's unanswered questions will be forwarded along to our speakers. Once again, we hope you take the time and fill out the forthcoming evaluation survey and give us your feedback. With that, we end today's Safety and Health Magazine webcast. We'd like to thank Michelle Higgins, Carmen King, everyone at JJ Keller, and all of you who listened in. Thanks and have a great day.